I've got a photograph that I took while I was on the patio over the weekend at Canyon Crest. And what I did is I looked west in the westerly direction down the canyon. And I thought, gee, I don't know if the camera's going to pick this up or not. But I took the photograph, and sure enough, it did. When I got home, it was very clear that the smoke from all of the fires has settled in some spots in that canyon. You see it in the haze in the sky. But what's interesting is how it's traveled through the canyon itself and is just lingering in some spots there. And it is so thick in the photograph you cannot see the one side of the canyon as you're looking down toward the west. And I sent that out to some friends all over the country to give them an impression of what we're going through. And I noticed in the Treasure Valley today they have a warning out for respiratory issues, and they've had them in the Mini-Cassia region as well. And a lot of this is due to forest fires not only burning in places like British Columbia, a massive one that has kicked up a lot of smoke that's been blowing down through this corner of North America, but of course we've had these fires. There's a great example of one that is burning to our north. One of my coworkers, Nate Bird, actually got a video of it, and it's amazing to see. And you can see the big tankers coming in, and the tankers are actually dropping the fire retardant on it. But with all that smoke out there, obviously, if you've got respiratory issues, asthmatics, for instance, would have a lot of problems. Dr. Jonathan Tripp is in studio with us this morning, and I'm going to say you're probably seeing a few patients who are actually having some issues with this.
Yeah, and our title of the what we're going to talk about today is "Suck It Up." What are we inhaling? And so the smoke is a big emphasis in what we're doing today. This is every August in Idaho, at least since I've lived here, that we get this haze of smoke around. And at first, I'm not quite sure why it's so cloudy, and then I realize, no, this is smoke, not clouds. And so there is, kind of we're trapped a little bit that way. And so I want to talk about just environmental respiratory disease in general. But this has been a time where, even those of us that don't claim to have allergies will find we have a scratchy throat or eyes that kind of feel like they're super dry and kind of burning, um, and thinking, well, did I get too much eye strain today or what's going on? But when you put it together, it's really the exposure to the smoke, ongoing, inside, outside, is causing us troubles in ways that we don't otherwise think. That we don't. It's not like standing in front of a campfire that all of a sudden you're choking on it. It kind of creeps up on you over a day or two or three.
I noticed that because I went to an event on Saturday and we were outside and it was just hazy. I mean, terribly hazy, and I could see it. Sunday, I came home from church and the haze was strong enough that it almost gave a cloudy look to the day.
Yeah,
But because of that, it didn't warm up as much as it had been. So I thought, well, it's not terribly warm, but I'm going to open up the doors and windows and sit here. It wasn't long before I was sneezing. I had a runny nose, and all day Monday, I just had a very dry throat. Almost felt like a sore throat.
yeah, yeah. It's just kind of scratchy. Not even a real cough. But if you have any tendency towards allergies or asthma, it just kicks into full gear. And so we've got quite a bit of, shall we say, sinus infection symptoms, sore throats, increased use of inhalers like the albuterol or what people talk about their rescue inhaler. And the truth is go ahead, keep using those. Of course, our biggest worry about any environmental exposure for breathing is you have trouble breathing. And, that's something you don't want to take lightly. And you actually want to try to preemptively strike. If you have asthma, you have emphysema, some type of COPD. If you already have an inhaled steroid that, you could use every day or you're supposed to use every day, do that, especially right now through our fire season, because you're going to keep the inflammation down in your lungs and reduce your risk of a spasm or a true attack or even pneumonia by using that inhaled steroid. And so, those of us that don't usually have trouble, or you have very mild asthma, and all you have is an albuterol inhaler that happens once in, you use it once a month or once in a great while. This is a time to say, hey, come see the doctor, because we can help and we can get you through this in a lot better way because there aren't a lot of us that can just say, well, as long as there's smoke, I'm going to leave town or go out of state for a while and enjoy a little better air right now. But that is one way out. It's an expensive way out.
I was going to say there are people who are probably coming in and nobody, I guess, is probably on the verge of death yet from this. But
Well, that's funny. You say nobody, but the truth is if you already have a compromised airway, meaning you've had asthma or you've had some lung disease from smoking, this is a harder hit than most people realize. And so if you get to where there's enough irritation, you get some inflammation in the lungs, you get a secondary infection, and that often turns into pneumonia. And one of the things that's really interesting is for years we've had many medical improvements, and we do treat pneumonia, easier, shall we say, because not so many people are hospitalized, but there's still a 20% death rate from pneumonia.
ooh,
So we don't want to, that's been that 20% for decades. So we don't want to, minimize, oh, I got a little bit of a cough deep down in my chest because, pneumonia kills still and it does a pretty good job, 1 in 5 people. So that's not one we want to mess around with.
going to be talking more about this in just a few minutes, a short break. Dr. Jonathan Tripp joining us in studio from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. Our studio guest, Dr. Jonathan Tripp from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Bill Colley with you as well. And we're at 62. It's 8:43. For people who are looking to get in touch with you at the office, how do they go about doing that?
You betcha. In fact, my emphasis on what we're talking about, especially during harvest season, we'll talk about dust and things like that, or the smoke season. We can help. Really, we can. We can do a few subtle things that may just change your life for the next month as far as breathing goes and your throat and whatnot. But our phone number is area code 208. And by the way, those of you on cell phones at least, you got to use 208 to dial anything now. And that might be true about all the landlines. I don't know. But 208 933 4400. That's 933 4400. You can reach us on Facebook at Tripp Family Medicine or at our website, trippfamilymedicine.com. So, let us know if we can help on these. And by the way, we've thrown in a few not well child, well, they are well child checks, but sports physicals because this week has kicked off the junior high and high school practices. And although we didn't plan it, we've had enough phone calls that we've opened up starting about 3 p.m. this afternoon. We have one of our providers that's going to be doing just sports physicals. So that's a little extra announcement there.
I was going to say a lot of people obviously interested in that. We were talking about air quality and the impacts it has on various people, and
Yeah, you were saying you saw somebody the other day walking through the store with a mask on, and
yeah,
sometimes that's somebody with a compromised immune system, somebody on chemotherapy, something like that. But right now, anybody that really suffers from any kind of respiratory trouble, having a decent mask will give you some benefit. It makes it a little harder to breathe if you have a good mask. There's some basic masks that are really inexpensive, and then there are a little more expensive, not terrible. It has the number N and the letter N and the number 95. So an N95 mask is considered by OSHA to be a really good mask to pretty much keep out most particulates, even at a smoke level. So I would recommend if you're really at compromised or struggling, consider one of those. But probably the bigger deal is staying inside. Air conditioning is better right now, especially using air filters. If you have a filter in your air conditioning system, consider changing that and get the maximum benefit out of that filter. And if medicines could be helpful, please let us know. We'd be happy to help with that.
I just the thing that it strikes me when I smell it, it reminds me of when I was a kid and you get a damp day where even if you had a well vented wood stove in the house, you'd still get a little blowback, and it would so you'd always have that smell of burnt wood,
Yeah,
and that's what it's like when I'm outside and I'm walking around in it. But there's a lot more in that smoke that is more than just the burned wood.
yeah. I mean, we're talking about wildfires, so it's anything that fire goes through. So it's wood, grasses, pollens that otherwise, you may not even get off the ground, but now they're put in the air. So it's the sheer volume of particulate that is really the problem. And You showed me a picture of somebody's reception off of the canyon, and the canyon looks like somebody put a cloud down in it, but it's all smoke.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's what we've been living in for the last at least several days or week, and looks like we've got some nice winds and maybe even some rain. To rain would bring a lot of that down, bring it back down onto the surface. So that would be helpful. But in the meantime, um, you know, if you have any kind of compromise or trouble, inside is better. Filters are definitely going to help. Masks can help. But if you typically have some allergies or some asthma, let's talk about an inhaled steroid or even a nasal steroid. That scratchy throat you were talking about. A nasal steroid will take about 3 days, maybe 5 days to kick in, but you can get a really nice month of relief if you're doing this right now, and if you have tendency towards trouble with dust from harvest season, with the plant-based dust that gets in the air, that same nasal steroid may take you through that season in a better way than you've had before. So these are some areas that we can help from a medical point of view. But I wanted to get back to what are the other exposures? I mentioned the kind of the organic dust from harvesting, and we get dirt, whether it's a windstorm. I used to live in Arizona, and they'd have monsoon season about this time of year, and it just brings in sand from California and everywhere else, and the whole desert seems to be coming through in the air, and it's impressive. You get to see a wall of dust coming at you when those come through. Um, but other things like animal dander or our regular pollens, our flowers, our trees, even grasses, um, those are things that contribute to environmental exposure. Coal dust. We don't have a coal mine nearby that I know of, but I've been in several states that do, and coal dust is a big deal. And so you hear about coal miners' lung or black lung. That's from long-term exposure to dust, and so those are some things. Chemical exposures. You know, uh, Sometimes we were sticking to respiratory stuff, but your eyes also, you can even have what's called acute angle glaucoma by the wrong type of chemical exposure. But inhaling, whether it's just putting gasoline in your lawn tractor, or chemical you're using for insecticide, or a weed thing, all of those you really want to be careful around and have super good ventilation, because those chemicals irritate the lining of whatever surface, your nose, your throat, your lungs, and then your body's response is swelling. And that swelling gets drainage, so that you got fluid in the spaces where you don't really want fluid. And then on top of that, it's irritated, so now you're susceptible to catching a virus, even fungus, or bacteria, and now we are set up for bronchitis or pneumonia. And I've already talked about how pneumonia really is a life-threatening disease. So that's kind of the gamut that I can talk about today on the types of these exposures. Um, but what's really interesting is when we talk about COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and asthma is included in that, but especially you think about emphysema. Um, if we could reduce every environmental exposure, we would reduce these kind of lung problems by 20%. Well, that's great, but how are you going to reduce everything? You can't. You're trying to minimize
Hmm.
the offenses that you're breathing in. But what that really says is 80% of these lung diseases are still smoking related. So when we, think about this in the big picture from a medical standpoint of view, really what we're after is let's get quit. Let's stop smoking. And if you have somebody that you're exposed to secondhand smoke, you know what? That's 20% of lung cancers in women are coming from secondhand smoke.
And as difficult as this has been dealing with the smoke in the air, 20 some years ago, I worked at a TV station and we had our Christmas party one year. And afterward, one of our coworkers, a fellow named David Muir, who's currently the top rated news anchor in the country,
Nice.
we're guys who use our voices for our work. David says, "Come on, guys, let's go. We got to go check this." David didn't smoke or drink, but he wanted to go see what this new cigar bar was like. We walked in there, and I thought we were going to choke to death.
Yeah.
That was far worse than the smoke. We've got a caller with us, Doctor. It's 8:51, and caller, you're on the air with Dr. Jonathan Tripp on KLIX. Go ahead.
Hello, Jonathan. I know you're not a veterinarian, but I thought I might want to also mention that animals could also be affected by this. And um, so I'm not sure if you know anything about that, but that might need to be addressed.
Well, I absolutely agree with you, and I'm an animal lover, but I'm not an animal doctor, so that works. Um, but I find it, I can't offer quite the same advice because I really don't know what we could do in the way of medicines. And I know that at least my animals are not going to wear that N95 mask that we're talking about. But if, the thing I could think off the top of my head would be if they're house pets, minimizing their exposure outside during all this smoke is probably better. On the other hand, I'd have to consult with a veterinarian. What else can we do?
That's, and of course, there's horses that live out back here, and there are some feral cats that live out back. They're always exposed to outdoor allergens, whether they be in the spring or any time of year. But people who have indoor pets, obviously, that their indoor pets aren't going to have quite the same.
Yeah, they just don't have the same exposure.
Just be like, those of us who are sort of cocooning inside the last several days to sort of avoid this.
Yeah,
But the people who have to work outside, if you're working out there and you're on the fire line or you're paving a road, anything like that, you're going to be exposed to this. You don't have any other option.
yeah. My best advice on that is do the mask and, minimize what's going into your body, even though you feel like, it's a lot hotter to breathe through that mask. It'll save you on the long run. Great example is last year we went to Nicaragua for a family humanitarian trip. But one of the options we considered was a similar or a different experience in Guatemala, where a lot of mountain area and the people traditionally have a open, wood fireplace, not even a stove per se, inside of their home, and with very poor ventilation, and the people typically are dying in their 40s and 50s, and mostly of respiratory illness. How's that for a surprise? No surprise there at all. So the humanitarian effort there is to build, very simple indoor stoves with a flume that get the smoke out of the house. And what they found is those people now are increasing their lifespan by 10 to 15 years just by getting a flume in the house. So there's a real example of chronic exposure, whether it's cigarette or otherwise, is very tough on your lungs.
What would you do if you came across somebody who was on the street and they obviously were in some distress from this? What are some things people might want to keep in mind in an emergency situation like that?
Meaning like they're really struggling to breathe.
Yeah.
My best advice there is get them to medical help because you know you you could, if you had an oxygen tank, I guess you could share that, but mostly getting them inside, getting them out of the exposure. But it probably at that point already needs some some actually medicines to help out.
Even young people who would seemingly, if they don't have asthma and they've not developed COPD, I'm sure for the very young, this is also still difficult.
Yeah, the extremes of age. So we're talking, 1 year old, 2 year old or less, and people that are, well, hate to say the extremes of age include 65 and above, but depending on your health, um, here I go coughing, or that actually is straight, direct result of the smoke.
Yeah,
So
I've
there
had a
you
lot
go.
of that too. Yeah.
So I'm a victim of the same thing. The extremes of age are they just don't have the resilience. And so, when I talked about pneumonia killing 20% of people, though those are the people that really die is usually the very young or very old. And so in a similar way, they're going to have the toughest time with this, uh, other than those that have known, moderate to severe asthma. They'll react very quickly to this. So, if you have a severe condition, I would say your best bet is just to leave the area. Um, and so, the lesson in all this is minimizing your exposure to any of these. You're going to get some. You are alive. You live on the planet Earth.
Hmm.
But when there are times where you have heavy exposure, it's time to remove yourself, especially if you have those extreme airway conditions. So sometimes it's just a little scratchy throat or runny nose, and that's kind of been my case. but other times it can be very threatening. So yeah, if you found somebody that you knew or just kind of out on the street, I'd direct them towards somebody that can give them some medical attention.
Got about a minute to go. You mentioned earlier, just quickly, that you're going to do some follow up sports physicals today.
Yeah, kind of unplanned until the last couple of days. We've had so many calls and we fit in quite a few people, but we're just opening it up starting at 3 o'clock. We have one of our providers that'll be available to do sports physicals. If you don't, if you have insurance and you have a wellness visit that you can do, it's usually no money out of pocket. And if you don't have insurance, we're still doing them at the $25 rate. So that's essentially a giveaway, and it is because we then send the money to the team that the do I dare say child the student designates. So that we'd love to have you, and we'd love to, especially if you're new to our office, we'd love to have your family come and get a little exposure.
We should point out they're
So
not all Bruins. That's why he has to be sort of careful what he says there.
that's right. No, we we have the expanded Magic Valley represented at our office. We really do.
Want to thank you. We'll see you again soon.
Awesome.
Dr. Jonathan Tripp from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls, Idaho. Coming up on 9 o'clock in just a moment, and news at 9 o'clock from Fox. Bill Colley with you as well, and one more hour of top story is just ahead.